Here's a problem. I'm at a community college, right? I'm at this community college. I'm trying to learn something. All of a sudden, I have a medical emergency and I call 911. What's the chances I'm going to get that community college respond?
Welcome to another episode of the EMS Wizard podcast. And on this episode, John thinks he's going to win the debate. John feels like he's ready for a debate, but I don't know that he is ready
Mm.
for the podcast guest to be great
And I mean
again.
every word of this when I say it. I
I just would like to
English.
say
Got
that
it.
I've decided to take this important step with my best friend. Given the current circumstances, it feels like the only logical choice. And I've got the full support of my family, and they're going to stand by
I
me
like
every
the
step
swap.
of this journey.
Well, I think everybody's going to need
Little
all the
swap.
support that they can get on that side of the podcast because there are officially 3 resident guests. So we're kind of, outnumbered. And even on this episode, we have 3 guests total, even though Walter, who is not with us at the moment.
in a world with so much division that is out there, just in society, a unique thing we have about this guest is how he has brought two things together.
Yeah.
And I think that'd be something important to talk about as we continue on here. But that's a pretty good focus point, is how this college has brought two things that probably in the past haven't looked like they would belong together, and is going to make it work. And I am interested to hear that part. But I'm gonna let you introduce them first, Mark.
Yeah. So our guest for this episode is Mr. Brian Hehl. He is the Director of Public Safety at Bladen Community College. Welcome to the episode.
Thanks. Great. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, man, we're glad you could join us. So let's start off a little bit with, I feel like we've got a lot of things to talk about within a relatively short period of time, but let's at least start off with like a little bit of an origin story, like how you got into EMS and kind of like the start of your career.
Well, so I don't have quite the glorious thing that I didn't have somebody in my family that was sick and I decided to do EMS or anything like that. I was just fresh out of high school and, working blue collar job, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And a couple of friends of mine in high school were on the fire department. So I just walked into the fire department one night about 3 months after I turned 18, started volunteering there. About 6 months to 9 months later, they brought first responders out to the fire station and did a first responder class. This is back in the early 90s. I figured out I was pretty good at EMS, better than I was at some things. So I went to EMT school and just kind of progressed through there. And I just really enjoyed what I was doing. So just kind of stuck with it. And EMT, then intermediate, advanced intermediate, and eventually paramedic. And then at the time, there were no paramedics in Bladen County, so I had to go somewhere else out of county to get my paramedic. I always lived here, but went to larger agencies outside and just kind of went through the career there. Nothing spectacular as a reason to do it. I just something to do. If some friends of mine were doing it, it just kind of led down that track.
I mean, if your friends are doing it,
Really, it's kind of what is that peer pressure thing. At least they wasn't jumping off bridges.
did you immediately? So you said, I think you already answered this question. You've been in North Carolina the whole time. So this was the fire department in North Carolina.
Yeah, Dublin, right outside where I live right now.
Okay, all right. So what you got into the fire department? I think that's the same way I started, and then I dove over into EMS. And you're saying you did the same thing. Did you jump to a rescue squad, or did you go to a county-based career system, or how'd that work for you?
So I started off with a rescue squad here. So I was on the fire department and one of the local rescue squads. And then when I got my paramedic, there were obviously no paramedic rescue squads. So I went to a county-based system. I started out in Johnston County, spent a few years there. I was one of the original QRVs when they first started the program back in 1999. Then they did some restructuring there, and I moved on to Moore County. I spent 10 years in Moore County. And that's where I started getting promoted up through the ranks, and then went on to Cape Fear Valley and was there for uh, 8 years, and then ended up getting into the community college system more full time at that point. So I stayed on the fire department for probably 25 years until it got just when I got into administration and EMS, it just got too much to be a volunteer. So I let the fire department go back about 7 or 8 years ago.
And was Moore County First Health then when you went?
So there was First Health there. I actually worked for the county. It was still there's still a county based system there. And that's who I worked for. And I worked for them for about 8 years. Went to Cape Fear. I left Cape Fear for college, and then things just didn't work out. It just didn't seem to be where I needed to be at the moment. So when I went back to EMS, I went to First Health, which was most of the counties around Moore
That's
County.
right.
So
First Health, they got the hospital in there and it's still a county-based. That's right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a critical care, specialty care unit in the county, and that's where I was based out of. But yeah, so I've worked for both actually.
Gotcha.
Again, nothing spectacular. Just worked up through the ranks and enjoyed what I was doing, and training officer for a few years, both Cumberland and at First Health, and then some operation stuff when I was in Moore.
So paramedic wasn't good enough for you. You decided one day you would want to be an officer. What was your first promotion process? What was the position? And can you remember what the process was like?
The first promotion process that I went through was Moore County decided to do field training officer because they didn't really have those. They just, if you'd been there a while, you could be a preceptor. They decided to do a more formal process and give a position and pay a little bit more money. And in that process, there was a couple of written tests, interview process, a scenario-based process. It was actually very in-depth for it to be the very first time that they did it. And I got that, and then I stayed in that role for a couple of years, 3 years maybe, and then they had an assistant supervisor position come open, and I went through that process. And that one was a lot less intensive. It was just an interview. Maybe I think there was a written test involved, but most of it was just an interview because at that point you'd already proven that you could be a paramedic, you could be a training officer, you kind of already stood the operations. Then they start getting into the administrative, how do you deal with employee kind of questions at that point.
So I'm hearing private system, county system, busy system, more rural system, and a lot of different roles. But what I would ask you is, in all of those different roles, certainly there was some similarity. And what would be, as a supervisor, similarity that you would start to draw from those different roles, that different organizations, that you would say as that EMS officer, that EMS supervisor, a commonality in all of them?
I think the commonality in all of that is the fact that it is still people that you're working with, period. The operations piece of it, it's just a matter of learning the ins and outs of. I've got long transports, I've got short transports, I've got 75 people that I'm dealing with, or I've got 8 people that I'm dealing with. The operations is what makes the areas different, whether it's rural, busy, slow, or not. The commonality is it's people. It's always people. It's working with different personalities, and some don't like other people, and making sure that you can find good fits between them. But again, I go back to when I say the people is I feel like that our most valuable commodity in public service is the people that can provide that public service. So I think the commonality is finding ways to keep your employees happy, finding ways to keep them wanting to do the job, keep them invested in the job. And the differences is just the unique operations, really.
It's a people business, and sometimes some people lose track, lose sight of that.
Absolutely.
But you went from the cartel, that's what we call Cape Fear.
Can't say that.
That I can't say cartel.
I don't think that's I think that's verboten, but
but you go from that agency to jumping into the community college system. What was the drive behind wanting to move from one to the other?
Well, when you're talking about going from an EMS supervisor or a training officer. And when you get to that point, you've determined you're either going to go training or you're going to go administration. You very rarely do you see somebody start going down the training route and go into administration. They either keep going through education. You'll see people that will take that training officer position for a short period, hoping they can go up to administration, but they don't generally stay there that long. They move on to something else, or they find that education piece. So I like the education piece of it, but the administrative side of it, being a director in an EMS institution, there's still administration. They're still dealing with employees. They're still dealing with paperwork. They're still dealing with processes and budget constraints and everything like that. So the administrative piece is still there. But when you're talking about where I was going to go, when you get to that point, when you start looking at EMS administrator positions, this is going to sound bad. It's not meant to sound bad, but you have to be in the right spot at the right time when a position comes open if you want to be eligible for that position. So you either just stay until the position comes open, or you just happen to catch it. And a lot of y'all are in administrative positions. I don't mean that to sound bad, but you know where I'm saying is, if you don't have that, if you're not ready for that spot when it comes open, they're just not a lot of them. They're few and far between. So you have to make the decision. Where do I want to go? I like teaching, and this where I'm at now is home. I've always been here, even though I've not always worked here. And the position came open, and I saw where I could make a difference there. And it was the director says, while it's education, it's still administration. So I'm kind of getting the best of both worlds and can make a difference.
But it's
And it's 2 miles from the house.
Oh, well, that's part you
That
can't
helps.
do.
That helps.
Anybody that's jumping board from local government into the COAMPS world, I think that's the thing that ends up being the shocking revelation.
Well, yeah, and I started in October, and we had a site visit in December.
Yeah. So,
Ooh.
that was diving in.
No doubt.
Yeah. Two months of preparing for COAMPS. Yeah, that was a fun 2 months.
Does not sound like a very attractive environment to have been drawn into. And that's, one thing I've always kind of had a hard time, articulating very clearly to some people that, like you said, usually you go that training route or you go that kind of operations administration type route. And one of the conversations I've had with people before is, trying to sell people on, going that education route, becoming an instructor, because I feel like everybody could use a extra instructor or two at their community college. I'm sure, they're not busting the doors down to come in and teach classes all the time. So, John always asks the question, sell me EMS. Well, Brian, what do you think? What would your thing be to sell me on being an EMS instructor?
Who in your EMS agency is going to have the absolute most influence on the culture of your EMS agency and the care that you provide to your people? Who's the person that does that? Not the first paramedic, not the administrator, not the training officer that sits in the office, not the supervisor, but that educator, that field training officer, that person that wants to teach. So I feel like if that's the most influential person in the EMS agency, then by definition, your educator is the most influential. And if we see that there's a problem with the care that we're getting, or we could do better, and let's face it, North Carolina is probably one of the better ones in the states. But we like to eat our own, so we're always criticizing ourselves. So we always see where we can do better, and one of the best places that we can do better is in the classroom. We can make that better paramedic, EMT, AEMT before they even make it to the field. And so people tell me all the time, well, what can we do better? Come teach. That's where we can make a difference.
It's very, very Southern Baptist. You want to make a difference. We're going to baptize you in this, bring you in.
I mean, but it is. That's baptizing and bring them in, or almost brainwash, I guess, if you really want to go down that route. But we can make the first impression that we make, the first set of goals, the first set of ideals that we set in the classroom is going to be hard to break, even with the person that has the most negative Nancy burnout phase. If we can set that standard early on, we make a huge difference later on down the road.
Now, I remember 9 years ago, instructors were not looked at in the same way that they're looked at now. Do you feel like they've changed? Because what I heard a lot was if they can't do, they teach, which meant they weren't that good in the field.
I still hear that. And I would tell you 20 years ago, I was probably one of those people that would say that. And there are still people that teach. I think, though, that what's happening now is with COAMPs, with accreditation, with more standards coming into place, that those that couldn't do really couldn't teach. And now they're weeding themselves out. So I think what's happened is some of the changes that happened over the years have pushed those out, that those that can't do teach, well, they couldn't really teach either. They could tell you
make it.
well, they could tell you that 2 + 2 = 4, and you can answer the test questions. And then when you got in the field, you still didn't know what you were doing. But I think we've advanced enough in the last probably 10 years with our education standards and our education practices that now we're making better clinicians, and those people that weren't great clinicians weren't really great teachers. They're on their way out.
Well, I want to hit that for a second, because I think that's 100% accurate. Is those that couldn't do, they couldn't teach. We said teach, but what they could do is they could talk. And a lot of times back then, all you needed somebody in the classroom to do was talk. So those were the ones, if you can't do it, then you teach it. Actually, if you couldn't do it, they would just go in there and they could talk about it. And so they would talk about, and this is where you got those war stories. People coming in and telling stories. Wouldn't even be their war stories. They talk about this one time in band camp from somebody else's band and somebody else's camp. So, and you're right, it's weeding themselves out, because it's going to take qualified being a kid, not certified, qualified people in the classroom to come in there. And that makes the biggest difference in the world. So I think I would adjust now those that can't do talk.
Yeah, and when I went through school, you had somebody that maybe would talk. That's been a long time ago. I'd have to think about it. But we also dug out our books after class and on the weekends, and we would read our books, and we would do our study materials, and we would prep ourselves to be able to pass it. The clientele we have today, if you don't spoon feed it, they don't know how to read a book, or they won't take that book. So we really do have to teach the material now and not talk, as you say. I agree with you. It's not those who can't do teach, is those who couldn't do talk or would talk. Yeah.
Want to chase the rabbit. I won't, but I'll just make the commentary of when John and I were going through school, there was no Wikipedia. There was an encyclopedia. And so if you were trying to learn something, well, John didn't know how to use, you were in that Encyclopedia Britannica, but probably about when Mark and Kathia were going to their 8th grade dances is about when the internet became a thing, and Wikipedia. But not
together.
Yeah, well, because that would be weird. And because she was in Florida and he was in North Carolina. And
not
so
there's anything wrong with that.
No, I didn't say that there was. So you're making it a thing. But the different generation that they have study habits, perhaps is the wrong word, but they learn differently than John and I did, and perhaps you as well.
Yeah, I think I'm probably in yours and John's categories. Actually, I think I'm a little bit older than John. I'm not sure.
If you are, it ain't by much. So that was nice little introductory. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of stuff. You took your college and made it an EMS agency, and a lot of people don't know that. But I was fascinated by that. As a matter of fact, as soon as I think I sent it to the guys and was like, hey, this is pretty cool, and a lot of people step back and go, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. And I immediately thought of something that we talk about in our officer classes and that we've talked about amongst each other, about how this gap that exists with, the dissolving of the rescue squads and whatnot. And then you don't have that piece anymore. So it's bridging a gap. And I immediately thought, without talking to you, but you remember I called you not long after that. And I was like, Man, to me, I think what Brian's doing is like this is a way to fill that gap, man. He can bring them into a rescue squad like environment because they're an EMS agency and really hold them accountable to being an EMS provider like person and it not even really be anything but help their educational part of that. But I could have just been drawing at straws for that one. So take a minute and tell us a little bit about what led you to that. What was the purpose and how is it working out for you?
So what led to it was when I worked for another college a few years ago, I brought it up, but there wasn't a lot of interest in it. So it was just kind of sitting on the back burner. I've been stewing on this for a few years. When I came to Bladen, one of the very first things I said that we need to do is this. And my dean at the time and my vice president at the time were interested, and they had questions, obviously, because nobody had ever done it. But my thought process is we have faculty, we have students, and if they're in an AEMT or paramedic class, they're already an EMT at least. So they're already credentialed providers. And why would we wait 10, 15, 20 minutes depending on what's going on? You know, if the county's gone crazy, it might be 30 minutes if there's a mass casualty. In Bladen County, they got 4 ambulances and 2 transport trucks that can be used for 911. And if we have a bomb threat at the high school and a mass casualty wreck, they've tied up every EMS unit. So then I'm going to wait for however long on campus to treat somebody on campus. Myself and the EMS director talked about it. We were talking back and forth, and all I was going to do was a basic level non-transporting, like the non-traditional practice setting. During our COAMP site visit, there was that period where there was somebody doing cyber bomb threats to high schools all up and down the East Coast, right in the middle of our COAMP site visit. Then when that happened, one of our high schools got that bomb threat. So obviously there's lots of activity going on at high school. And then there was a wreck up on the north end of the county. It had like 6 or 8 patients. So the county was overwhelmed. And my EMS director at the time, he said, you know what? Let's change this. I know you just want to do basic, but you've got an ambulance. Let's do a transporting ambulance, and you run at the AEMT level, so you don't have to worry about the some of the medications, the narcotics license, and everything. But you'd be a secondary provider. You can provide the medical coverage on campus. We get dispatched with everybody else. We don't bill, so they do the transporting, but we can transport if we need. But the other part of it is we have a franchise agreement with the county, so we can go anywhere in the county. So if something happens outside of campus, we've got the manpower and the county's overwhelmed, we can get dispatched and go back up the county. As far as the logistics of it, we already had the ambulance. We already had all the equipment. About the only thing we didn't have was a few of the medications that were expired, because we got expired meds or fake meds. But the only thing we had to buy was a few of the expired meds and put those on the truck, get the truck inspected. We already had all the faculty. We already had all the people. And if you come as a student, if you're currently enrolled in an initial class, you're also listed on the roster as a responder. So if anything happens during class on campus, class goes. You can't ask for a better real world scenario than an actual medical call when you got faculty there to let the students treat the patients and learn. And if it's an EMT or an AEMT class, technically they can count the clinical time and the skills because we're an AEMT level squad. That was the gist of it. The idea was just to be able to provide that care on campus because we're already there. And it just kind of grew into being a backup for the county. And then as we started looking into it a little bit more, we realized, wait a minute, our students get benefit out of this. They can, if the thing continues to grow and we continue to grow our program, at one point I'd love to do a work study as part of the curriculum program. And then part of that work study is you come and man the ambulance as a transporting unit at least one day a week, and we might start picking up a little bit of a zone off the campus to back up the county. But that's future plans, ideas anyways.
So have you seen success with it? Like, I know you ain't been doing it long, I don't guess, but I mean, have you run into any trouble spots or has it went flawlessly?
No, the everything that the county requested that we have as far as insurance and all that stuff, we already have. It's a standard liability. So we've not had any issues with that. We had to do a little repair work to the ambulance, but we were going to have to do it anyways. It's just the air conditioner gone bad in it. We use it for parades, and so it has not been repaired anyway. So nothing that we've spent out of pocket a few $100 on medicines. We've already had we probably had 5 medical calls the week of waiting on the ambulance to be inspected. So we just went act as, as the first responder. But after that, since November 3rd is when we got our ambulance inspected and got our license, and we've run 5 calls on campus and actually transported 2 off campus. It's not a lot, but the fact is that we're providing care to our people on campus.
And you guys are the first to do this. Am I correct? First in North Carolina. Was anybody else?
I think so. I was talking to some guys at Guilford up at Skills USA, and they said that they used to do it years ago, but I don't know if they actually had a agency license or not. Because when I talked to Todd and San Juan, they didn't seem to think anybody had ever done it. So if we're not the first, I'm not sure. I think we are the first. I won't claim that because there might be a potential, but we're the only one right now. I do know that.
Yeah, I don't know. On the Guilford thing, I know they did have at GTCC an ambulance that I think maybe was outfielded Guilford EMS, but it could have been under Guilford EMS's system, not
And
GTC.
that may be what may be the case.
And you got Western Carolina, obviously they do their thing, but it's university.
Right. But I do know that we're the only one at the advanced levels. And,
No,
just,
now that I don't think's ever happened, right?
Yeah, because Western is only a BLS squad.
Oh, okay. That is pretty cool. The future. Now you gotta have future in your mindset because you're already thinking outside the box. If you want to talk about thinking outside of a box, take your community college and put an ambulance on it. Because from where I'm at right now, that is not something that I would even want to get into the habit of even thinking about doing. Although I am a flag waver thinking that is awesome decision. Actually, Walter, who's not with us, Terry, you ought to be knocking down his door. Come on now, they got 2 ambulances there and up your way on that college campus, man. They ought to be chomping at the bit, put them things out there.
I can tell you the city over here would be delighted.
Well, and I think that speaks to that partnership. And one of the phrases that I use sometimes is I think operations and training are like peanut butter and jelly. You build that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and if you go to pull those 2 pieces of bread apart, you got jelly in your peanut butter, and you get peanut butter in your jelly. And sometimes people think, and I think if nothing, tonight is kind of that exploratory of how the training and operations are really interwoven. But this to me speaks of that peanut butter and jelly of operations and training, and the 2 supporting each other, not being independent.
So one thing that we do with ours, I felt like one thing that we miss in education is making employees. I've seen it being a training officer from a couple different agencies and dealing with it since being a field training officer back in the early 2000s. We do a good job on the clinical side, some better than others, but making a good paramedic to understand the medicine and the treatments, but they forget how to make them employable. You got to wash the truck. You got to check the truck off. You got to check your medications off. You got to do that. So every initial class that we have, they have 1 day out of the week that they have to go check that ambulance off. And it works out well because basically what happens is about 4 days out of the week, the ambulance gets checked off. So the Monday, Wednesday paramedic class might do it on Monday, and the Tuesday, Thursday paramedic class might do it on Tuesday, and then the night EMT class might do it on Wednesday night or whatever. I let the instructors work that out. And even if it misses a couple of days, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like we're running 100 calls a day. But the idea is these students know that part of their job when they come to campus is just go ahead and check that truck off. If they need to wash it, we'll take it around to the maintenance shed to wash it. But the students are learning that they have to wear their uniform to class just like they would to work. They have to check the truck off just like they would at work, beyond learning the medicine piece of it. So all the operational pieces that I can infuse into the classroom is also being part of their education piece.
But that's filling that gap like a rescue squad. That's what I was saying, is like all the stuff that you're doing with that is what the rescue squads used to do. before they became career paramedics or career EMS people. They'd go there and meet at the rescue squad, check off the trucks, wash it, learn all the vernacular, learn
Yeah.
some of the culture of it, and then off to work they go and become what you say is employable, which is, part of filling that gap.
Right. The only thing that we don't let them do is do documentation, because we just literally got access to ESO last week. North Carolina Office of EMS has an agreement with ESO for agencies that have very, very small call volumes like us. We couldn't really afford to pay for ESO. We were just going to do paper documentation, but OEMS still requires that reporting software. So they just make an agreement. The only thing we have access to is to put the charts in and to run reports. So what we have the staff do, or the students do, is just do a paper report. And then myself, the lead instructor, or the clinical coordinator, if I get one pretty soon, that'll be our job, just to take the paperwork and put it into ESO. And then, so we're working through the logistics of that yet, but that's about the only thing that they don't do.
I think that's a whole nother meaning to having the workforce ready.
Yeah, I think it is. And that was the whole point of doing it, was the whole point was it was a wasted resource. It literally said every campus that has faculty that are EMS certified, especially that have ambulances that are usable, that's a wasted resource. And that's the way I looked at it. And that's the way I approached it.
So for those that are, probably listening to this episode right now and are thinking, man, I wonder if our community college could do something like that. And what would be, one of the things that you wish you might have done differently, or, I mean, aside from maybe thinking of it earlier and getting started earlier into it or whatever, what are some other things, what are some things you wish that you had done differently from that first initial outside? I know you haven't been doing it. How long have you been doing it now? Like
November 3rd.
Since November. So you've had enough time to probably think, yeah, I kind of wish we had done it like this, or some tips and tricks maybe for some of the listeners to maybe go back to their program coordinator and have that conversation.
So, right now, I don't know that I would have done anything different. Learning through the process, knowing what I needed to do. Luckily, I had dealt with, when we took over agencies before, when I worked at, Cape Fear Valley, when we took on Hoke, I knew some of the processes of adding a franchise agreement, that type of stuff. So I knew what was expected. It's just when you get with state government, it just doesn't move fast. So I was able to work on this piece and then move to the next piece and go to the county commissioners for the franchise agreement. I wished it would have moved faster. But we were the first. So everybody was cautiously taking their time to make sure we had answered every question that we could answer. So I don't know that I would have done anything different. And we haven't been in business as an agency long enough to run enough calls. We just got the access to ESO. So I don't know that I have the answer to that yet. But as I stand right now, I wouldn't change anything. Everything's moving smooth. I had to work through some processes to be able to answer some questions. So if somebody else wanted to do it, now I know pretty much what those answers are, as far as how do you do this, how do you do that, do you talk to county commissioners, the questions that your president at the college is going to ask about liability and that type of thing.
You can make one change inside of North Carolina EMS right now, and I'll even narrow it down, education, to the educational system of EMS in North Carolina right now. What is one change you would make if you had complete command and control of it?
This is going to make some people mad, and it's okay. I feel like we need to, whether we do continuing education or curriculum, we need to get a standardized education. And I mean, that's what I did with our curriculum versus our Con Ed, because curriculum has more hours than Con Ed. That's just the way the system's set up. I put my stuff together. It took me a while to do it, but mine's kind of like a block system now. At Bladen, you can start on the Con Ed, go into curriculum. The third semester, you can go back to Con Ed. It doesn't matter because of the way the classes line up. At the end of it, you're going to be done with 4 semesters of the same education. And if you had been doing your gen eds, you could get your associate's degree through a Con Ed program through the bridge. All that to say, we've got to get our education on the same sheet of music so we can get out from under Health and Human Services as a credential and get under a licensing board so we can start getting the same getting equal billing at the dinner table. So we're not the kids sitting at the little table. We can sit at the table with nursing and respiratory and all the other allied health professions, so we can get licensure, so we can start getting reimbursement and start billing just like everybody, like professional licensure does, instead of, as Steve Worth likes to say, we get billed at the same rate as toilet paper. I think we've got to get our education on the same standard so we can move towards licensure.
I think a lot of people share that enthusiasm. They share that goal. I don't know that I think the argument becomes in the mandate. Sometimes.
I know, but you asked me what could I change if I could change
hey,
it.
I believe
That would be it.
I'm right there with you. I'd like to see a licensing board as well. And you know, I guess COVID coming along showed the industry, well, couldn't come at a worse time if you're in that initiative, because it depleted, the workforce. And so, mandating things in a certain direction is gonna, I mean, we see it. Actually, we got a pretty good preview, and this is John Wilson 2 cents. So it's it. You want a preview of what associate degree type stuff will limit you at. Look at what associate degree on level 1 did to the instructors. It just depleted them. I still believe in the standardization of it. I still believe we should have some level that says, so they're not talkers, they're teachers. But I think that's a good roadmap to say, hey, we just said you got to have this associate degree, for instance, to be a level 1 instructor. And now I can't find level 1 instructors. When I ask people, are you interested in being an instructor? They'll be like, sure, but I'm not interested in getting my associate degree. And I'm kind of like, all right, well,
Right.
come teach anyway. I need your experience, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to take some time to move forward on that.
I think it would take whatever mandate would be. It would take them putting that mandate in place, but putting it far enough down the road that it gave those that were resistant time to work towards that process a little bit, instead of it being next week. But there's still that deadline, because every time they talk about it, and COVID did it, we were starting to get a little momentum, and then COVID hit, and then it all went to wash. But when we put that mandate in there, or we start talking about it, they want to mandate it next year, and that doesn't give people enough time to prepare, to upgrade, whatever the case may be, or to get over the initial shock of it. So I think if we were going to do that, we would need to put a little further distance down the road so that they can say, well, this is coming and you've got time to work on this. And I may be completely wrong on that, but at some point we've got to put our foot down and say, we've got to do better. We continue to do better, but we got to keep pushing to do better in what we're doing now.
I agree with you in the fact that we have to get the plan together. I think we probably have to get the education-minded people on the same road as well. And that may be a struggle too, when, how many long-term program directors do you have out there, right? Before they switch over, do something else. So that, I think, in the past has been sort of a struggle too, getting the folks at the table, that when the seats change every year is different seats. So, I mean, it's hard to get a lot of traction in those type of things or whatnot. But I appreciate you coming on here. I think it's cool what you're doing down there in Bladen. I don't think anybody else out there could do it the way that you've went out there and done it. I think you used your experience that you've had. You've got a really good plethora of experience that's out there that led to your ability to be able to do those things, and the fact that you were able to do that, because when you look at program director role of what you've been doing and stuff, and the amount of what you were able to accomplish, as you said, walked into basically a site visit from COAMPS, you were able to accomplish a whole lot. But it takes that experience that you got in, from your upbringing and your Moore County this and Cape Fear this, to get to where you're at, to be able to move in that direction. I think that makes all the difference in the world. So to me, that is a motivator to people, to know that when I get this experience and I want to be something, to see that the amount of experience a person gets today is going to help them 2 or 3 years down the road when it's time for them to do something, outlandish. Because I know Brian, and there ain't no way Brian wanted to walk in 2 months out from a site visit from COAMPS. No way.
Right.
But
no, No,
were
they
able
told
to
me that. They told me that the first day I got there. They said, "Oh, by the way, your site visit is December 1st." Great.
Funny how you left that out of the interview.
Right. Yeah, they conveniently left that one out. I mean, I would have still taken the job, but that was a good surprise on my first day.
They got to
I
keep
can
you on
imagine.
your toes.
Oh, they did for about 2.5 months. There's no doubt about that.
Well,
So-
Brian, if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to you or contact you, to kind of talk about your program and what you're doing there, what's the best way for them to get up with you?
So they can give me a call or they can email me. My email address is bhehl, BHEHL at bladencc.edu. That's my obviously my work email. That's the easiest way to get in contact with me. And my office number is 910-879-5648, and it does port to my cell phone as well. So if they were to call that and I'm not in office, at least during office hours, it'll come to my cell phone. So those are the two best ways to get out with me. And
Or I could just walk on campus. I could just walk on campus and dial 911.
Yeah,
There's
that you
that.
can do too. And we have a call box too. So